Hi, I'm Khrystyna Klimash, and you're on a podcast, Building Digital Products, where we speak about the technologies that can boost your business here and now. And today's guest is Robert Owen. He is a seasoned entrepreneur and mentor with a remarkable track record of guiding early-stage and pre-seed startups to market success. Robert has nearly 2 decades of experience in sales, operations, and business strategy. He has built and led high-performing teams across the technology sector. Hi, Robert. In your description on LinkedIn, you called yourself as the founder whisperer, which sounds a bit funny. Would you mind explaining what it means?
Absolutely, and happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Um, I use that phrasing because I discovered that I have a knack for understanding the challenges that founders face. Having worked with many different founders, especially very young ones, as teenagers, I've kind of developed a feeling, as you will, for understanding the challenges that they're facing and being able to talk and coach them through looking at these challenges and things they need to accomplish, um, to be able to understand why things happen the way they do or why they need to pursue a certain strategy. So similar to you'll have a dog whisperer or horse whisperer who comes in and tames the horse and kind of helps to calm things down when the seas are rough. I see what I do with founders, whether it's formal or informal coaching and advising, or working within the startup. Much the same thing, to help kind of smooth out the path for the founder as they're growing their startup.
Robert, you are very experienced investors. What are the key ingredients and features, in your opinion, that turn a regular startup into a unicorn?
That's a great question. And I think it's also something that a lot of founders misunderstand as to what venture capital and investors are looking for to make it a VC backed startup. In order to hit that, ski slope and that growth trajectory, to where it generates the type of returns that investors need in order to make it a VC backed startup. And I think a large part of it is how the founders are approaching their market, and really, what it boils down to, and I think most investors would agree with this, is whether the startup and the founder are pursuing something that could be seen as a painkiller or as a vitamin. And to explain that, a painkiller is something that everybody faces, and there's no getting past it. You have to slog through because there's no good solution for it, and it's something that there's a very big need for. Whereas a vitamin is something you take to make yourself feel good. You don't need it. You'll survive without it. So it's more of a nice to have rather than a must have. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally makes sense. Let me clarify it one more time. For example, if the product is highly successful and becomes a unicorn, it would be function more as a painkiller, as you mentioned, addressing the critical need that helps the startup survive in the market. But if it's more like a vitamin, something nice to have but not essential, there is no guarantee that the startup will survive because it's not a must-have for customers.
Yeah, more or less. There's never a guarantee that a startup will survive, right? There's a lot of different factors, execution, time to markets, the team that's in place, a number of different factors. But when it comes to whether it's a painkiller or a vitamin, there are some exceptions. Facebook, probably more of a vitamin than a painkiller, but it was a nice to have that everybody suddenly wanted, and so they've obviously done very well. if it's a painkiller, if it's something that a founder and their founding team have come up with a new idea of how to do something that no one else has thought of, and figured out a better way to do something and introduce that to the market, obviously there's a much higher likelihood of success because this is filling a very high value need in the marketplace. So you can have a lot of success with that. Where a lot of founders make the mistake is they think they have this great idea that's a vitamin but not a painkiller, and they try to sell that to investors. And investors, for the most part, are actually pretty savvy in understanding which column it fits in. And if they're it may be a great idea, but it may not be a VC backable, investor backable idea or a company. And there's nothing wrong with bootstrapping a company that's a vitamin that can become a really good company, 100 million in revenue, 500 million valuation, whatever that is, still might not be a VC backable company, because there's not the possibility for that growth trajectory that VCs require, something that's called power law, for them to actually be able to invest and generate the returns that they need.
How do you help startups identify and capitalize on their unique value proposition in a crowded digital marketplace?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of it depends on, a lot of it is sitting down with the founder and actually identifying what they're trying to do, the hole that they're trying to fill, and better understanding it, whether it might be a painkiller or it might be just a really, really good vitamin. There's also ideas out there that don't make any sense at all. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of founders that try to do this sort of thing. It's not easy. And some of them, are painkillers, but they may face challenges down the road that, at least with existing technology, might be insurmountable. So just because it's a great idea and it's a painkiller trying to fill a need, again, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to succeed if all the things don't line up. And it's that process of going through for the first year, 2 years of a startup's life cycle and trying to identify that kind of big thought of product market fit, right? Which some companies find very quickly and do very well at. Some of them, struggle with it for 5 or 10 years.
And from your experience, do you see that founders that founded a unicorn, they created it because of the huge experience in specific industry or not?
Actually, no. There might be some correlation between success and experience in the industry. But one of the things that I've also found, personal experience with one of the companies called Vise that works in the financial services and the financial technology sector, is the co-founders Samir and Runik were 13 years old when they came up with the idea. I think I met them when they were 15 and started working with them. And obviously they had very little experience in financial services simply because of their age. However, the idea that they came up with, I think part of the reason why they've had a lot of success, and are still succeeding, is because of the lack of experience or direct experience in the industry. They didn't have any of the preconceptions that might go along with that experience, right? The thought that, well, this is the way it's done, so we have to do it this way. They came into it with a completely clean slate of what was possible. And therefore, they weren't handcuffed by whether something was possible or not. They had this idea, and this is the direction that we needed to go in order to make it happen. And so they were able to push their way through, whereas someone with 10, 15, 20 years of experience in the industry quite likely would have failed because what they wanted to do, they may have been blocked by their experience, if that makes sense.
Everyone knows that the digital market is very saturated, and sometimes it becomes difficult to shape some outstanding value proposition for a startup or even an established company. How do you help startups in this respect?
It's a great question. So, for instance, the market that I'm working in right now with my current startup, there are theoretically over 140 different, strategic finance platforms available on the market. By far and away, most of them are mid-market and enterprise level products. And what's interesting to me is the fact that there's so many products out there, so many different competitors. I think indirectly and maybe directly implies that there's no real winner in the marketplace, and thus nobody has really done it right. Nobody has actually provided, the painkiller or the solution for what people are searching for and needing. And so even though there's a lot of competition out there, there's still a space that's ripe for disruption if someone can come in and dial in what is actually necessary and needed in a platform for that space. And I think that's true with pretty much any vertical, whether there's a ton of competition or very little competition. Unless it's something where you have one company that's got an extraordinarily high percentage of market share and basically is the big bully on the block, they can afford to push others around and either snatch up a good idea through an acquisition or, as Meta has done and Zuckerberg is very good at doing, is spotting a good idea that someone else has developed at another company and then building their own version of it internally. And that's probably the most difficult part of coming into a vertical or to a market, is competing with the existing platforms and technology. If there's other newish players in it. If it's a market where there's only archaic, old behemoth companies, enterprise companies in there. The ERP space is a great example of this. There's basically been no new ERP in the last 20 years, right? Oracle, Microsoft, etc. have, Salesforce is probably the most recent new example. They're all massive, massive companies. But because there's no newer someone in the last 10 years, I would argue it's actually a space that is ripe for disruption. Because once you get to a certain size, once you get to a certain size of company, your quality tends to degrade, and your ability to adjust on the fly and keep up with advancing technology probably diminishes, at the same exponential value as the size of the company.
What are the strategies you have found most effective for scaling a digital product rapidly?
It's a great question, and I don't think there's any one right answer, or maybe even any 5 right answers. One of the things that I have found extremely valuable is always being in close contact with your customers. Whether they're the most important customers or the newest customers, the biggest ones or the smallest ones. And especially early on, as a startup, you can learn far more from your customers and from the data that you're able to bring in from those customers working on and in your platform than you're making through revenue. And so I think, one part of it is founders who are too intent on generating revenue rather than getting users onto the platform in order to learn from that data. as it's coming in and the user usage. And I think tangentially to that, one of the things I learned very early on in my career, probably several careers ago, was if you take care of your customers and you take care of your employees, then growth and profits will follow. And that's been true for every company that I've been a part of over the last 20 plus years. Is if we do right by our customers, we look after them, we make promises we can deliver, and we take care of our employees, provide them with good benefits, a great work-life balance, the coaching and mentoring that they need to succeed, the tools they need to do their job correctly, create a good culture and a fun environment for them to work in. They'll stick around, you'll attract a higher caliber of employee who then turns out a better product more quickly, which then your customers are more happy with and can advance better, and your startup grows better. And so concentrating on those two buckets, your employees and your customers, I would argue, and I think my experience has shown, that drives so much more productivity and growth in your startup. Even a mediocre idea and a mediocre platform, if you excel at those two pieces, you can do far better than an excellent platform with a very motivated founder who doesn't pay attention to those little things.
Yes, I think this can be valuable guidance for our listeners. It's essential to remember to consider all stakeholders in a project, including employees. Employees are stakeholders too, and taking care of them is crucial to a project success.
Yeah, I talked to a friend of mine recently who works in people operations. She's a COO of a company called Talentful, which does outsourced talent hiring and placement. And one of the things that she was saying was that treating your employees as customers is a significant mind shift for any founder and any leadership team, because in effect they are month to month subscribers for your company, and they can cancel their subscription by resigning their position, going to work somewhere else, or they can maintain their subscription by enjoying where they're working, who they're working with, and what the vision is, and where the company's trajectory is going, and all those things. They're just as important as the actual paying customers on the platform.
What are the important rules for building successful sales team for digital products in early stage startups?
It is not easy, is rule number one. Don't expect it to be an easy transition from founder-led sales to a sales team, to hiring account executives or sales executives or business development representatives, however you set that up, depending on your business structure. I would say the most important factor is having a good sales process. And what I mean by that is having the individual that you hire, whatever the position is on the sales team, has to have a diligent process for moving through the sales cycle, whether it's for going out and driving new business, prospecting, whether it's touching base with the prospect through the sales process, scheduling the meetings, the follow-ups, working their way through the playbook, to the sales close. When does that happen? How does that happen? What happens after the sales close, the onboarding for the customer? If there's a handoff to a customer success team, or if the AE is responsible for the renewals and thus has to keep in touch with the customer. One of the things that always annoyed me with any software platform I've ever used is when the only time I hear, after I'm on the platform, the only time I hear from any sales representative or customer success representative at the company is when it's time for a renewal. And so I hear from some new person every year. It's like, hey, I'm your new customer success representative. By the way, it's time for your renewal. Here's the price. I have zero relationship with this person. The company has never reached out to me. And so my decision to extend and renew with the company is solely based on, my usage of the platform itself. And if that's been mediocre, there may be another platform, and likely is another platform out there that's trying to compete for the same space that I'm more interested in because they're actually trying to build a relationship with me. So if you are hiring a sales team, you have to know whether it's a transactional sales process or if it's a relationship sales process. If it's a transactional, then you really don't need a sales team per se. You just need a prospecting team. And that may actually fall under your marketing, your go-to-market strategies, rather than an actual sales team. You may have someone just to dot the T's and cross the I's, but more likely than not, and especially in software these days, there's more of a relationship process. You rarely have someone just coming to your website, reading through, answering all their questions on their own, and then signing up without having actually talked to somebody. If that is your platform, fantastic, you're going to do great because you don't have to talk to anyone. But if you have a sales process, or if you have a longer process for getting a new subscriber or a new customer, knowing what that process is and being very diligent about working your way through that. If you are any sales rep that has a good sales process, they can sell anything in any industry, in any vertical. If they have a good sales process, they can go through any way where they need to, in any way they want. If they don't have a good sales process, then ultimately they're going to struggle quite a bit.
Okay, can you explain how to properly and correctly align product development with financial planning in startups? Sometimes it happens that development takes and costs more than estimated. What would you advise entrepreneurs to do in such situations?
It's a good question. So oftentimes what I would say and what I learned with working with some exceptional product managers and heads of product at some of these different companies is that ideally your product development should be at least 6 months ahead of where you're actually selling. And what is very difficult, especially at the earliest stages, is you obviously haven't had enough time to push that product development forward enough to where you're selling 6 months behind your product development. What often happens in the first couple of years is it's actually the other way around. Your sales team and your founder is out selling what your product is hopefully going to be like in 6 months or 3 months or even a couple of weeks, when in fact you need to work to reverse that. And I think what it boils down to is there's always an urge to get out and sell, and to sell quickly and get a lot of traction, get a lot of customers on the platform. The problem is you tend to move too far ahead of your product development. And it comes unnaturally to pretty much every founder I've ever known, is to hold that back just a little bit, tug on the reins just a little bit to allow that product development to push forward enough to where you're not fighting for position on the roadmap and priorities for, well, we have this customer that needs this, so let's go develop that before we do all this. And what ends up happening in that instance is your product roadmap just is zigzagging back and forth, trying to build these one-offs to get a new customer. And what that suggests is that you as the company, as the startup, and as the founder, haven't done enough market research, haven't talked to enough people to figure out what is it that you're actually supposed to be building that's going to attract the market. You're instead reacting to the next person that you talk to says, well, I want this or I want that. And that's not a good way to build a startup.
Startup and other companies need to balance between building and immediate customer needs and long-term product sustainability. In other words, some features are needed right now, but some, like implementing AI, aren't crucial right now. The company may see the direction in which it will become crucial in a year or something. How would you advise finding this balance? In our experience, it can be challenging for potential clients to prioritize as they often feel they need everything at once and within a month.
Yeah, it is a very difficult challenge to navigate. And the worst thing that can happen is that you are talking to and working with a customer who is leading you in the wrong direction, right? And there's such a thing as a toxic customer, right? Someone who it looks great on paper, it sounds great in theory, and it may be worth a lot of money down the road, but is it actually what you want to be building, right? Does it align with the vision of the founder of the founding team of the startup? And sometimes you have to say no to a customer. And there are times where it's more healthy and the customer will actually respect it a lot more if you say, no, we can't do that right now, but we'll circle back with you in 6 months and we'll be much closer to what you're looking for. And the challenge is, again, going out and talking to enough customers and enough people to figure out what is that middle of the road. What is that 80% where if we build in between these lines, this is going to cover 80% of the market. And if too early on, we have one design partner that's way over on this side, it can greatly skew what we actually see as our center lane for development. Right. So one of the important things, and one of the things that we've tried to do in, at least the last 3 or 4 startups I've been a part of, is going out and finding different design partners that represent slightly different avenues of development. And it forces us from a technical perspective to build a broader base and possibly a different kind of architecture, a different schema. But it also helps define what that 80% roadmap looks like. And there are times where we've had to fire a design partner because it ended up they were too far off field and they would have been pulling us off of what we determined was our center lane. Does that make sense? And so really defining what that roadmap looks like, does it align with that vision? Have we talked to enough people? And this is kind of the product market fit problem that a lot of startups struggle with, is they don't necessarily talk to enough of who their target persona is. They're talking to a lot of people, but they're not being discerning enough and being able to identify what is our actual target persona, what is the job to be done, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for. Let's talk to those people and confirm that we're headed in the right direction.
Let's switch to defining the success. How do you measure whether a digital product is successful? Are there any other metrics beyond traditional, like lead acquisition, revenue, and so forth?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, but it also requires planning. So a big part of the answer is, what is the goal for the founder, the founding team, right? If it's co-founders, what is their expectation? And this is something they should be thinking out very, very early on in their process before they've even gone out to try to raise money from investors, because that's part of the equation, right? If they're going out and raising money from investors, then the expectation is that they're going to be gunning for and hit a trajectory to that growth. And in that case, the success probably has, a couple of commas in that dollar figure. It may be an acquisition, it may be an IPO. It's rarely stays as a private company. Very few instances I can think of where I know the founders who have kept their company private after hitting a trajectory, and that, they needed to buy out the investors in order to do that. And that's not an easy thing, obviously, because you need a lot of cash on hand for that. So that success really is determined by what are your expectations for the company. If you're bootstrapping, success could be, a 10 million, a $50 million company, doing, if you have 5 employees or 10 employees and you're doing 2 million in annual revenue, that's a great company, right? Yeah, and that's not easy to build either. It's not just about, I want to be a unicorn. I want to be $1 billion or $10 billion company, and be on the 30 under 30 Forbes list, and all of these different things. That's not necessarily a success. Depends what the market size is. It depends on what the vision allows for. So there's all of those different factors, but all of those need to be planned out and at least considered and thought about it from day 2 after incorporation, if not before then, when you're still in the ideation stage.
How do you advise startups to approach pricing strategies for their digital products? What are the criteria that are worth considering?
So pricing strategy is a tricky thing because it seems like the goal lines are constantly changing, right? 5 years ago, no one was talking about usage-based pricing, whereas today it seems to be all the rage. And there's a lot of especially SaaS companies, software companies that are looking at and considering usage-based pricing simply because everybody else is talking about it, which may not be the best thing for their business, best thing for their model. And usage-based pricing is very difficult to transition to if you've started out on a subscription or a seat license or something like that. So part of it depends on what your direct competition is doing. You can have some disruption effect if you go into a market where the standard currently is, for example, seat licenses, and you have to pay per seat in order to access the software. But you can disrupt that market if you come in with just a flat rate pricing. So in effect, it's unlimited seats. So there is some strategy involved with that as well. But I think a big part of it is, what is the competition doing? What is best for your business? And what is best for your customers as well, right? Going back to what I said previously, taking care of your customers. I have known a lot of business leaders who will stick with a service provider, whether it's software, hardware, or any type of professional services, even if they're a little more expensive, because they actually do the right thing when it comes down to it for their customers. Whether it's, hey, we screwed up on something, here's a discount or a refund, or we're not going to nickel and dime you, or we're adding in these extra services and incorporating all of this into a single umbrella pricing. Most people don't like being nickel and dimed, myself included. I'd rather see what the total all-in price is for everything, rather than say, well, you need this and that and the other, and then go down the lane. You start out expecting I'm going to be spending X, and suddenly you're spending X squared. So kind of figuring out those different nuts and bolts, and also plan ahead. Your pricing strategy for year 1 will likely be different from your pricing strategy year 3 or year 4, as your product develops. So it does make sense to plan that accordingly. You get users onto the platform, give them discount in pricing. Once your product has matured, switching your pricing strategy, whether you're moving up market into the mid-market or enterprise level or however that is, there's a number of different permutations for it.
Thank you for answering. It was all from this section, and I would be happy to ask you flash questions. I will give you 2 options, and you need just to pick the one. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Great. Navy or Marines?
Marines.
Servant or autocratic leadership?
Servant leaders.
Sunny beach or snowy mountains?
Oof. If there's a fruity umbrella drink, a sandy beach.
Traveling by train or jet?
I haven't traveled much by train, so I would have to say by jet.
San Francisco or New York?
Oh, that's tough. So I grew up near San Francisco. I would have to say right now, New York.
Thank you so much for joining our show today. It was a pleasure speaking with you today, and thank you for accepting my invitation to join our show.
I appreciate it very much, and it was very enjoyable for me too.
Click like and subscribe button to not skip the following episodes. Bye!